My brain is a fog, having watched all 6 of these today, and it was just way too much Vince McMahon after 6 hours for me. This is not a series that I would recommend binging. Take your time and go through this. It was a lot to watch. Do you have? I know we're going to be spending a lot of time over the next week going through episode by episode. I'm going to be doing a show with Brandon Thurston and David Bixenspan on Thursday with sort of our overall thoughts. But just from what you have seen, Wei, and I think a lot of the attention will be placed on episode 6. Tell me how you felt that they handled this, given the fact that they had no access to Vince McMahon after the allegations came out. And this was a documentary series that, I mean, it was outlined today by Bill Simmons and David Shoemaker that there were thoughts like, will this actually get released? This went through a lot of iterations and they did make it to the finish line, but a very different documentary than the one they set out with.
Sure. Yeah. I could definitely see that struggle in the final product. Like what this original project was set out to be, and maybe even what it was up until the initial retirement took place, was very different. And I think you could tell that this was like there was a lot of reworking of like the source, whatever they captured, in order to turn it into the current product that it is. So I definitely feel like while watching even like the bookends of the show, it felt like there was a bit of a struggle, just even in the editing room, for what it is. So I haven't gotten to the Grant stuff yet, so I can't really comment on that. But as like
right, that's one of the half watches. Yes.
Yeah, apologies.
Yes.
So maybe you're better to speak on it than I am at this point.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on the series. I mean, it goes into so many different stories to varying degrees. Of the stories they covered, I don't know if there were any that I watched and was like, man, what a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened. Like, I thought they hit the key points. I think in several of them, there were details left out, some of which were important, some less so. I think overall, the strengths of the documentary. I thought that, number one, of course, they had the access to so much of this footage. Like, I thought this was a really well edited documentary in that regard. It sounds like, from those that, and just listening to Bill Simmons' most recent podcast, it sounds like they were just floored by the work that Chris Smith put into this. Bill Simmons, who is, I mean, the guy that helped launch the 30 for 30 series, said this was like the best, I don't know what the exact wording was, but like best like documentary filmmaker he has worked with, or the best team he has worked with. Like, that's some pretty high praise that's coming for Chris Smith, who came into this a total non-follower of professional wrestling. And sometimes that can be good and sometimes that can be bad. It seemed in this case, he came into it with a pretty open mind about this whole thing and just a natural curiosity, which are what the best reporters or producers, that's going to be a common trait that they have, a curiosity to learn about this world. So I was impressed with that. Vince McMahon is a subject that I think that's going to be most people's thought on this, is what you got out of Vince McMahon. And that kind of became the premise of the whole 6 episodes, is who is this guy? And I've always stated that, when it comes, especially when wrestling books were much more kind of in vogue, especially in WWE, it was a Vince McMahon book. How great would that be? And I was the opposite. I was like, I think this guy would have a horrible book, because I think his memory is pretty terrible. I think he had a good amount of recall of what he is put through here. But there's also a lot of stuff that comes across to Vince McMahon that here is a guy that I think at the end, I don't think there's a whole lot of sympathy towards Vince McMahon. That is through 6 hours of hearing his stories, his approach to business. I found it very depressing, just a lot of the family stuff especially when you see the fact that he himself had such a desire to earn his own father's, Vince Sr.'s respect and love. And the cycle goes through with Shane, where I thought this documentary was pretty revealing about Shane. Like, I thought he he mentions one line in one of the episodes about, when we're out there in front of the camera, we don't peel back everything, but we give people enough. And that sort of was Shane's demeanor in this. Like, he wasn't going to flat out state his relationship with his father or just be a total open book. But you could take a lot of his answers and you could see that that repeated itself with Vince and Shane's relationship that I found to be, if you were Vince McMahon and watch this, there's a lot you can probably be taken aback by and look back. I don't know how much of these scandals he necessarily looks back at in terrible terms, but to just see your son speaking about just the way he was about trying to earn this man's respect and love. Like, I don't know how a father watches that and feels like they did the best job as a father, to be quite frank.
Well, if there's any sympathy that you might have for Vince, it would be hearing his childhood stories and what it meant for him to experience the approval of his dad at maybe the one point right before he passed. Hearing "I love you" from his dad for the first time. I mean, that's probably some of the most vulnerable we've ever seen Vince McMahon on camera, and maybe some of the only time we've ever heard him even speak about that. So I think I don't know if this is intentional or not, but just being presented with that footage, I think gives a lot of viewers potentially the narrative that somehow that might be responsible for the type of terrible person that he is today. The fact that he never received that sort of love from his parent. Yeah, it's if there's any sympathy you might have, it might be related to that. The rest of what I've seen, again, I haven't seen the whole series yet, feels very much, it's like Vince acknowledging that these things have happened, kind of chalking a lot of it up to just like, the right move for business and being unapologetic.
That's the constant, and that extends to like just family stuff too. Like, it's always business. Business is number one. And I think you see an individual that just feels very just detached from life, almost, in terms of like that singular focus above all else. I guess you can. This certainly, if you had your concerns that this was going to be just a hagiography of Vince McMahon, that was not what this was. I thought they went into.
I don't even know what that means. What is that?
I mean, this was not like a hero worship piece of Vince McMahon. I think they went into a lot of the scandals, especially in like the Ring Boy scandal was focused upon in episode 2. They interviewed Phil Mushnick. I thought Dave Meltzer was tremendous throughout this series. Like, this, to me, I think is a much different documentary if you don't have a Dave Meltzer in there, that they used as kind of Dave Shoemaker's role was essentially the one that was, I mean, as he put it, he was the glue from topic to topic and someone that can fill in the blanks that a constant for documentary filmmaking. Dave Meltzer was the fact checker, and Dave Meltzer was the person that they leaned on as the authority of Vince McMahon's world, where you have all of these people that rotate around Vince McMahon and his orbit that are in, like, it's presenting without saying it, like this ultimate control that Vince McMahon had all over these people. And even in Extense's documentary, like there is a fascinating, they're talking about the scandals in episode 2, and Jimmy Hart is just like right there. Is like, he's being asked about, stuff he heard. And he's like, I don't know how much stuff I'm allowed to be talking about here and what they want out in the open. I mean, he's just pretty much, and then you never hear from Jimmy Hart again. It's like, okay, this guy has essentially no credibility for this. Like, he is there to say the company line.
He's there to present maybe the fear amongst, the roster at the time.
I think it was a very informative, like
clip.
There was a lot of Jimmy Harts probably. Mm-hmm. And, not all these people are like a Bret Hart, who is not going to have any of those reservations that are going to speak openly. But in terms of somebody that if there was someone that I think comes off the worst, I would think like outside of like Vince McMahon, he said some terrible things. He had a awful like recollection or description of like Rita Chatterton basically denying the rape charge in 1986, but then caveating it with, but even if it had been a rape, the statute of limitations has run out. And I was like, oh my God, dude, like just like diarrhea of the mouth that just shut up. I thought, like, again, there's so much to digest here. I'm glad you and I are doing individual reviews of each episode because a lot of this just is coming to me as I'm recalling it. The chapter on like the Benoit murder suicide and into the concussion discussion, like you have legitimately, I think WWE can hang its hat on, was it a perfect company post Benoit? Far from it. But did they get better in terms of athlete care, concussion awareness? They did. But Vince McMahon's views on concussions, this is the last person I would want handling like concussion protocols or being someone that I just, whenever you and I talk way about what would happen in the main event of WrestleMania if a guy got a concussion, it's like this is the guy making the call. This guy calls into question Undertaker being concussed in that match with Brock Lesnar. Like, you went with to the hospital with this guy, and Steve Austin like had a pretty like doesn't believe in CTE, which I mean, man, that's I'm not a CTE guy. I mean, dude, that's like saying I'm not a science guy. Like, I don't know. You can't come back with a response to that. But Steve Austin isn't running this company. Vince McMahon's like, I just thought like, wow, this is some like pretty outdated thought process when it comes to concussion awareness and just the education. Like, this is, I don't know. I was stunned by just the comments by especially Vince McMahon, but Austin too on the concussion front.
I saw the Austin quote get picked up, maybe other than, anything associated from Vince, but like, anything other than Vince. I saw the Austin, I'm not a CTE guy quote picked up probably the most. And yeah, that was pretty shocking to hear from Austin, especially since like, from what I remember and from what I've seen other people comment on, he's spoken plenty of times about the effects of his in-ring career on his body and his memory on his podcast. So I don't know why he said this. I mean, listen, like, we are watching a documentary with clips that are kind of presented. We don't exactly know what the questions are, but this particular sentence in talking about like, just to paraphrase, I think what he was saying, he says that he got knocked out once, and he said something to the effect of, if you're getting concussions in wrestling, you're not doing it wrong. And then, saying to some extent, I don't believe in CTE, or I'm not a CTE guy. I want to know how that came about. I think he has to. I'd love for somebody to talk to him and to get follow-up from Steve Austin on that particular line, what he specifically means. McMahon, at least you can point to the fact that he, brought in Chris Nowinski and instituted a new policy to be able to say, like, okay, at least like McMahon addressed the issue in some way.
But even that is like they discredited like Nowinski at the beginning. When he was still working with Robert Cantu, and Dr. Amalu, who was the featured who Will Smith played in the movie Concussion. Like, they were very much like took it as though they were like under attack at first. Like, they tried to discredit Nowinski. McMahon even kind of does it in the documentary. Like, it was like this quack science, and it was.
Well, he did mention that Nowinski was attacking him, and so that's when he said he called Nowinski, and they ended up bringing him in, working with him.
Yeah, which I don't even know what the extent of their relationship is now. Like, it was. Like, if he is anyway, all this came from like the Benoit talk, and like McMahon could not have been more dismissive of the idea that there was any link. Again, like you cannot pin it down. It's like this was the reason. But the idea that this guy sustained head trauma, and just said, well, those diving headbutts, that's a work. It's a work. Right. It just to me was an amazingly. I don't know, like, simple look at something much more complex.
Although I will say, like, even at this point, I would not have I wouldn't have expected McMahon to take any responsibility for the Benoit double.
Well, that was
suicide.
consistent throughout. Like, was there anything in this that he said he regrets
responsibility
or took
for?
responsibility for? Said he would still run the Over the Edge show with Owen. Wouldn't have changed that. Didn't have. I mean, this was a guy that, he did not strike. He said many times, "I look forward, and anything negative, you just move on."
Yeah.
And that seemed to be it. I just wanted to circle back. Like, so many of these interviews happened before the first set of Wall Street Journal articles in June of 2022. The end, which I guess you saw the first half of episode 6 or the last half? The
first half.
Okay.
The first half.
Oh, you saw the first half. Okay. Well, at the end, I don't want to get ahead of where you are.
Please get ahead.
Bruce Pritchard is offered up to them. Mm-hmm. It's 2 days before the Janelle Grant lawsuit is filed. And Bruce Pritchard, this is a weird comparison, but it reminded me of that TNA pay-per-view when WWE got Ric Flair to do the Hall of Fame that year. And in return, they sent Christian to be inducted into the TNA Hall of Fame. And if you remember that pay-per-view, Christian walks out. This man didn't have to say a word. He so did not want to be there. And that's what this felt like. Like, Bruce Pritchard was being offered up to the Wolves here to come back and do the follow-up interview. This is after the first set of, the first resignation of Vince. But by the time he's doing this interview, this is before the Grant lawsuit drops and the second resignation. And, I mean, he just is asked. It's like, you've seen some of the rough cuts. Like, what do you think of the series so far? He's like, I hate this. I think it's awful. I think you're just, Vince McMahon is not an asshole. And I mean, it's someone that is very attached to Vince in Bruce Pritchard, but it's like this guy was not going to say anything critical of Vince McMahon, like nothing.
Right.
And I just like, that's kind of the trade-off is that, people are going to, just when we look at like different people and the level of, are people coming in here with preconceived notions or agendas? And it's like Bruce Pritchard's role here was pretty much to play defense for Vince. And I just, after 6 hours, I just didn't know how much insight you were really going to get, because this is someone that was just not going to say anything critical of Vince McMahon. Right.
Yeah, I do. So that is in line with the reports that we have out there, or prior to this, of Bruce Pritchard's role in it, basically kind of playing somebody reflecting, breaking the fourth wall, maybe in some way, talking about the actual thing that we're all watching. And I'm curious to know like why the director decided to include something like that here.
It's a great clip. I would have seriously put this in the trailer of him saying, I hate this series. Like, Bruce Pritchard saying he hates this series is as effective as that Vince McMahon statement on Monday.
I mean, it could just be that, it could be a way for the producers to add a bit of extra credibility, to say, like, for people that were curious about whether or not we would be unbiased enough for this documentary. Well, here's somebody who's attached to the company who hates it, and maybe that's just a sign of their own authenticity. Now, I do find it interesting that like Bruce Pritchard is somebody who's still very active in this company and will be working on a Netflix production. And here he is in a Netflix documentary, arguably looking some of the worst, as somebody who's defending. And let's be fair to him. This interview was done before the specifics of the allegations, but not before.
This last interview is after we know about the Wall Street Journal ones. This interview was January 2024. They put the date
before the lawsuit with the
before
details.
The lawsuit was filed. And
right.
I mean, Bruce Pritchard explains, like Bruce Pritchard explains the fact that Vince has greatly helped with the medical expenses and issues with his wife. Like, he has an enormous, it's a best friend that is on this, and that's what Bruce Pritchard's role is. But boom, it just cuts to the Janelle Grant lawsuit, and it's like, dude, Bruce Pritchard comes off like they did him no favor with that edit. And I guess that was the trade-off.
Is that an editing trick?
You know what? I watched this, and it's like, yeah, if you like I'm watching this and it's like, yeah, you might be annoyed by like B-roll that supports a particular line of questioning, or to me, it's like I didn't watch this and felt like any of this was like unfair or underhanded, and certainly nothing approaching the level that I've seen on many WWE documentaries. So, listen, Vince McMahon. By the end of this, I thought that it was. Listen, there's aspects where I felt you could have gone a lot. You could have gone a lot harder on Vince McMahon. There's no question. There's areas you had, yeah.
You could have done a 6-part documentary series on several of the individual topics that were,
easily,
only given what, 10 minutes. Yeah,
you could definitely have done that, and they had to go through a lot. And yeah, you could have done episodes on this. Like Bill Simmons said that they could have done 10 episodes on this, and there's hours of interview footage with Vince on the cutting room floor that is, ultimately, I think for a lot of these subjects that want to be the focus of these, like you understand why, like what is in it for a Vince McMahon to volunteer himself where he is giving up the creative control aspect of it. And I think it's just, there's going to be few and far between where you see subjects of this level that hand over that ability to another to producers that I'm just going to do it myself, and I'm going to take out the bad parts, and I'm going to produce the documentary on myself that I want.
He had every opportunity to do that while his company was, he's got a documentary production, arm of his company, or at least had for several years. At any time, he could have written his own book. He could have commissioned his own documentary series about himself with him having control of final edit. This just seemed to present a very unique opportunity where he was willing to hand that off. And then all of this stuff happens to him that completely recolors his life story. And at that point, he no longer has control, but yet has already given up the rights. So the existence of this documentary even is, I think, pretty amazing. The fact that we've actually seen it, or at least, most of us, or you have seen all of it, and I'm about to watch all of it now. So it's wonderful. I can't wait to dive deeper into every episode with you.
So again, Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time, I'll be joined by Brandon Thurston and David Bixenspan. We will be extending this conversation and giving our thoughts on the series. And then beginning Friday, Way and I are going to go episode by episode. Friday's show will be free, covering episode 1, which Way has watched. And then Saturday through next Wednesday, daily releases of the Double Shot at postwrestlingcafe.com. That will cover episodes 2 through 6. So those are, you will get daily Mr. McMahon Netflix coverage beginning tomorrow and running for the next week if you join the cafe. So looking forward to chatting more at length with you.